Welcome to Ian Cinema, your destination for endless entertainment and unforgettable movie moments. Discover exciting films, inspiring stories, and cinematic journeys across every genre. Whether you love action, drama, thrillers, or timeless favorites, there's always something waiting for you here. Sit back, enjoy the experience, and let Ian Cinema bring the magic of movies to your screen. In today's video, we'll take a deep dive into the complete story of The Quest, 1996, introduce its talented cast, examine its box office performance, and uncover the unforgettable moments that make this martial arts adventure so memorable. If you enjoy movie reviews and detailed film breakdowns, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's get started. The story of The Quest begins in the turbulent early 20th century, a time shaped by colonial rule, widespread poverty, underground crime, and rising political tensions across the world. Unlike many traditional martial arts films that immediately focus on tournaments, rivalries, or legendary heroes, The Quest takes a different approach. It first establishes a world driven by survival, deception, and the harsh realities of life on society's fringes, creating a strong emotional foundation before the action truly begins. At the heart of the story is Christopher Du Bois, played by Jean-Claude Van Damme. At the beginning of the film, Du Bois is far from the honorable martial artist audiences might expect. Instead, he is a clever and resourceful drifter who relies on quick thinking, adaptability, and street smarts to survive in an unforgiving world. The film opens in 1920s New York City, portraying a place marked by economic hardship, criminal influence, and deep social inequality. Within this challenging environment, Du Bois makes his way through crowded streets, hidden alleyways, and neglected neighborhoods, constantly searching for opportunities to stay one step ahead. Rather than being introduced as a skilled fighter or celebrated hero, Du Bois is presented as a determined survivor whose resilience and ingenuity become the foundation of his extraordinary journey. Du Bois is deeply familiar with the realities of life on the streets. His personality is a unique blend of humor, charm, recklessness, and quick thinking, allowing him to adapt and survive even the most dangerous situations. Rather than planning far into the future, he focuses on overcoming whatever challenge is right in front of him. The defining part of Du Bois' life is his bond with a group of homeless children struggling to survive under harsh conditions. He isn't a perfect guardian, but he does everything he can to protect them from hunger, exploitation, and abandonment, relying on whatever unconventional methods are available to him. This relationship reveals the compassion hidden beneath his questionable choices and clever schemes. Although Du Bois steals, manipulates situations, and bends the rules, his actions are not driven solely by personal gain. At his core, he is fiercely loyal, especially to those who are even more vulnerable than he is. Determined to give the children a better future, he comes up with a dangerous plan built on theft, deception, and escape. The plan perfectly reflects who he is: bold, impulsive, and fueled more by confidence than careful preparation. But like many desperate schemes, it soon begins to spiral out of control. A series of mistakes, betrayals, and growing dangers turn what once seemed like a simple hustle into a life-threatening crisis that puts everything he hoped to achieve at risk. As law enforcement, criminals, and unforeseen consequences close in from every direction, Du Bois is forced to flee. The city that once served as his chaotic yet familiar home suddenly becomes hostile territory, where survival depends not on clever strategy, but on staying one step ahead of everyone chasing him. While trying to escape immediate danger, Du Bois becomes caught in events that reach far beyond ordinary street crime, shifting the story from local survival drama into an international adventure. This transition is a defining part of The Quest, as the film intentionally expands its world step by step. What begins in the crowded, struggling streets of the city gradually grows into a much larger story involving smugglers, hidden agendas, unfamiliar countries, and cultures far removed from anything Du Bois has ever known. His journey is not driven solely by heroic choices. Instead, It unfolds through a series of accidents, mounting pressure, and the consequences of decisions made in moments of desperation. As he attempts to flee, Du Bois finds himself aboard a ship tied to dangerous criminals whose goals have little to do with his survival. Taken away from everything familiar, stripped of control, and surrounded by people shaped by violence and self-interest, he is thrust into a world where power and survival operate by far harsher rules than those of the streets he once knew. At this point, the film's tone begins to change. Although Du Bois still relies on his humor, quick thinking, and ability to adapt, the dangers around him become far more serious, making it clear that wit alone may not be enough to keep him alive. At the same time, the quest starts to reveal its deeper themes. Beneath the excitement of the adventure lies a thoughtful exploration of personal transformation, identity, and the experience of encountering unfamiliar cultures. Du Bois' journey is no longer just about escaping the consequences of his life in New York. It is becoming a path toward discovering who he truly is. He's being drawn toward experiences that challenge everything he believes, reshape his skills, and introduce him to worlds built on entirely different ideas of honor, combat, discipline, and personal purpose. What makes the opening so compelling is the sharp contrast between who Christopher Du Bois is at the beginning of the story and the environment he is gradually forced to enter. Du Bois is not introduced as a disciplined martial artist destined for greatness. Instead, he is flawed, impulsive, resourceful, and driven by survival rather than spiritual wisdom or formal combat training. Yet stories of true transformation rarely begin with perfect heroes. They begin with ordinary people who are completely unprepared for the extraordinary worlds awaiting them. As fate pulls Du Bois farther from the only life he has ever known, the film carefully sets the stage for a much greater adventure. That journey leads him into a world of hidden traditions, international conflict, demanding physical challenges, and a mysterious competition whose true significance he has yet to understand. As the quest continues to expand beyond the crowded streets of New York, Christopher Du Bois, played by Jean-Claude Van Damme, becomes increasingly entangled in circumstances far removed from the petty hustles and day-to-day survival that once defined his life. This shift from urban street life to an unpredictable international journey is a crucial turning point. It forces Du Bois into unfamiliar environments where the instincts that once kept him alive are no longer enough. His quick thinking, confidence, and street-smart adaptability are tested against foreign cultures, uncertain alliances, and people who view honor, conflict, and violence through an entirely different lens. After escaping the growing troubles he left behind in New York, Du Bois believes he is finally on the path to freedom. Instead, he falls into the hands of ruthless smugglers who thrive on deception, intimidation, and exploiting anyone vulnerable enough to trust them. What initially seems like a temporary escape soon turns into captivity, disguised as a journey filled with promise and opportunity. Torn away from everything familiar, Du Bois comes to a painful realization: escaping one danger doesn't always mean finding safety. Sometimes, it simply leads to a different kind of threat. Life aboard the ship introduces a much darker tone to the story. The confined quarters, shifting power dynamics, and constant tension between those in control create an environment ruled by fear and coercion rather than trust. Accustomed to surviving through charm, quick thinking, and carefully calculated risks, Du Bois soon realizes that his usual tactics offer little protection within a system built on strict hierarchy and brute force. The ship serves as a powerful psychological turning point because it strips away much of the control Du Bois once believed he had over his own life. At this stage, the film reveals his vulnerability more clearly than ever before. While he remains resourceful and remarkably resilient, it becomes evident that he is far from invincible. He has no real authority, no dependable allies, and only a limited understanding of the larger events unfolding around him. As the situation grows more dangerous, his survival depends less on strength and more on his ability to adapt quickly before circumstances overwhelm him. At this stage, the story also expands far beyond its original setting. taking on a much broader international scope as the journey crosses borders, new cultures, unfamiliar environments, and increasingly complex challenges come into focus. The boy is no longer confined to the harsh realities of poverty and survival in New York. Instead, he finds himself navigating a world shaped by maritime trade routes, regional power struggles, and hidden agendas that stretch across nations. This shift is significant because the story gradually evolves from a simple tale of survival into a larger international adventure driven by global movement, political interests, and ideological conflict. Amid the uncertainty, the boy meets people whose lives, values, and motivations are vastly different from his own. Some encounters are purely transactional, others place him in grave danger, while a few prove deeply transformative. Through these relationships, the film slowly shifts his role from someone focused solely on staying alive to an unwilling participant in a much larger conflict. Although his perspective remains rooted in practicality and the need to survive each day, outside forces continue to push him toward experiences connected to powerful, organized systems that he does not yet fully understand. He has little idea how deeply these larger forces will shape his future. One of the most important developments during this stage is the gradual introduction of martial discipline as a central theme. Rather than serving as simple action or spectacle, it begins to emerge as a meaningful force that will influence both the narrative and the boy's personal growth. Up until now, physical conflict in the boy's life has largely existed through a survival instincts. Street encounters, and reactive violence. Combat, when present, has been practical rather than philosophical. But the environments he is entering operate under entirely different assumptions regarding fighting ability, personal mastery, and the symbolic role of martial skill within cultural identity. This contrast begins laying the groundwork for Du Bois' transformation. He remains clever. He remains impulsive. He remains deeply shaped by improvisational survival logic, but the world surrounding him is changing faster than he is, and that imbalance creates both danger and opportunity. As conditions continue evolving, Du Bois finds himself pushed toward territories where physical endurance, adaptability, and moral choices begin carrying greater importance than simple deception or quick escape plans. The emotional tone of the story becomes increasingly layered during the process. Adventure remains central to the narrative, but beneath the movement between locations and escalating danger lies an emerging question regarding identity itself. Who is Christopher Du Bois when survival alone is no longer enough? Who does he become when placed in systems governed by discipline rather than improvisation? These questions do not receive immediate answers, but the story steadily moves closer toward environments where the will become impossible to avoid. By the end of this phase, the sense of a journey surrounding the quest grows stronger and more expansive. Du Bois' life is no longer moving along a predictable path shaped by personal schemes and localized danger. He's being carried towards something older, stranger, and significantly more consequential than anything he originally intended to encounter. A hidden world of combat, competition, and a cultural ritual waits further ahead. He does not yet understand its rules. He does not yet understand its stakes. With every mile separating him from New York, the distance between Christopher Du Bois' old identity and the person he may be forced to become continues growing larger. As the narrative of the quest moves deeper into its international adventure framework, Christopher Du Bois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, becomes increasingly disconnected from the familiar logic that once governed his survival. The further he travels from New York and the chaotic but understandably environment of street hustling, the more obvious it becomes that he also entered a world shaped by forces far beyond quick improvisation, deception, or clever escape tactics. The journey is no longer simply a geographical, it is psychological and cultural. Gradually pushing him toward experience as capable of reshaping his understanding of combat, identity, and personal purpose. The unstable circumstances surrounding Du Bois eventually place him within environments where control changes hands rapidly and trust remains fragile. Rather than functioning as the manipulator of situations, he increasingly becomes someone reacting to systems designed by others. This shift is important because it forces his character into unfamiliar emotional territory. In New York, uncertainty was something he knew how to manage. He understood street power, desperation, criminal opportunism, and the informal rules governing survival among people living outside stable institutions. But the world he's entering now operates through traditions, hierarchies, and hidden structures that do not recognize his old expertise. During this phase of the film, the story begins introducing stronger elements of martial culture and a philosophical contrast. Du Bois' earlier relationship with the physical confrontation was practical and instinctive. Fighting existed primarily as a means of protection, intimidation, escape, or survival. Skill mattered, but discipline in the deeper sense, a discipline connected to identity, honor, and structured mastery was largely absent from his worldview. The narrative now begins placing him closer to individuals and environments where combat carries cultural meaning extending beyond immediate violence. This thematic evolution becomes increasingly significant because the quest is not merely constructing a tournament narrative, it is building a transformation arc. The central question gradually shifts away from whether Du Bois can survive via dangerous circumstances and toward whether he can adapt to a world requiring different forms of strength than those that previously sustained him. As he continues moving through foreign territories and unstable alliances, the film strengthens the atmosphere of uncertainty and adventure. Exotic locations, maritime danger, underground dealings, and hidden motives contribute to a sense that Du Bois is drifting towards something mysterious whose full significance remains concealed. The pacing of this progression matters because the story deliberately does a full revelation of the larger competition waiting ahead. Rather than rushing directly into organized combat, it allows tension, curiosity, and environmental urgency to develop first. At the same time, Du Bois himself continues struggling with the displacement. He remains resourceful, but his confidence increasingly exists alongside music, confusion and vulnerability. He is accustomed to reading people quickly, adapting under pressure, and creating opportunities inside unstable environments. Yet, many of the situations surrounding him now resist simple manipulation, cultural unfamiliarity, shifting power relationships, and the limited understanding of broader events place him in a position where adaptability alone feels insufficient. This growing imbalance becomes emotionally important because it exposes a truth beneath his charismatic exterior. Christopher Du Bois is talented at surviving chaos, but surviving a transformation demands something more complicated. It demands the ability to learn from worlds that do not revolve around his existing strengths. The film gradually introduces this challenge through encounters, observations, and shifting circumstances that expose him to alternative ideas regarding strength and discipline. Combat begins appearing less as random violence and more as its structure and expression shaped by tradition and training. Although Du Bois does not immediately embrace these ideas, the narrative steadily moves him closer toward environments where he will no longer have the option of remaining detached from them. The atmosphere surrounding the story also becomes richer in a historical texture during this stage. Colonial politics, international mobility, and hidden global networks contribute to the sense that the world of the quest exists at the intersection of adventure fiction, martial mythology, and early 20th century geopolitical attention. This broader backdrop enhances the film's sense of scale, making Du Bois' personal journey feel connected to larger systems operating beyond his original concerns. By the end of this phase, the feeling of inevitability surrounding Du Bois' path becomes increasingly noticeable. He may not yet understand where events are truly leading, But the audience begins sensing that his accidental journey is slowly aligning with something far more deliberate. The scattered dangers, unusual encounters, and unfamiliar environments are not random obstacles disconnected music from one another. They are preparing him for a hidden world where combat is a ritualized, national music. Pride carries symbolic weight, and warriors from different traditions gather beneath the rules older music, and more disciplined than anything Christopher Du Bois has encountered before. Music. He is still a survivor from New York, still impulsive, still improvisational, music still carrying instincts shaped by poverty and hustle, but the road music beneath him is changing. With every step deeper into this unfamiliar world, the distance between the man he has been and the fighter he may eventually become continues quietly and relentlessly as the story of the quest progresses further into an expanding music world of danger, a cultural collision, and hidden purpose. Christopher Du Bois, music portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, finds himself moving deeper into a music reality that no longer resembles the improvised survival life he was accustomed to in New York. The transformation taking music place around him is gradual but unmistakable. The further he travels through unfamiliar territories, music the more the film begins shifting away from simple adventure films, music and towards narrative depth, personal evolution, and the hidden structures of martial arts culture operating beneath it during this phase. His understanding of the world and his place within it shifts according to the cultural systems of and previous circumstances. Music reading danger quickly and manipulating opportunity often provided effective via survival music tools. Here, however, he faces situations governed by rules, expectations, and values that cannot always be solved through more calculated deception. This tension, music between old instincts and unfamiliar demands becomes music one of the most important emotional layers developing in self-respect. Music Du Bois is not yet undergoing a complete transformation, but pressure. Music is steadily forcing him towards a self-respect. Music he continues to rely on the old ways that once protected him. Music yet the world surrounding him increasingly requires patience. Music observation, and forms of understanding that extend beyond music immediate needs. As the narrative broadens the international atmosphere, the film deepens its sense of mystery surrounding the larger world, slowly pulling Du Bois toward its center. Hidden networks, organized interests, and rumors connected to elite martial competition begin gaining stronger narrative presence. The story does not immediately reveal everything about this secretive structure. Instead, it builds anticipation through fragments of information, encounters with unusual individuals and environments carrying an almost mythical sense of distance from ordinary life. This gradual expansion matters because the quest is not interested in presenting combat merely as spectacle. It is constructing a symbolic arena where martial skill becomes connected to a national identity, a personal discipline, and philosophical contrast between competing traditions. Du Bois does not fully recognize these yet, but the audience begins sensing that he's moving toward an event much larger than any street confrontation or a survival scam from his past. At the same time, the film continues strengthening the contrast between a Western improvisational individualism and structured martial systems rooted in a cultural discipline. Du Bois embodies adaptability, spontaneity, and survival through instinct. The world he's approaching, however, values mastery developed through a repetition, sacrifice, and adherence to training traditions extending across generations. This ideological contrast becomes increasingly important because it creates the foundation for his eventual evolution as both a fighter and a person. The environments through which he travels reinforce this thematic direction. Locations feel less like temporary backdrops and more like stages in a journey reshaping his understanding of power itself. Physical danger remains present, but emotional and psychological displacement to become equally significant. He's not simply escaping threats anymore, he's being forced into encounters that challenge how he interprets strength, purpose, and identity. Another important development during this stage involves the growing visibility of fighters and the combat traditions existing beyond Du Bois' previous experience. The narrative begins surrounding him with indications that martial excellence in this world is not random violence or underground criminal brutality. It is structured, ceremonial, and deeply connected to cultural representation. Fighters are not merely individuals seeking personal dominance. They increasingly appear as symbolic extensions of regions, philosophies, and disciplined schools of combat. For Christopher Du Bois, this emerging reality creates quiet but meaningful pressure. He remains clever. He remains resilient. He remains capable of surviving environments that would overwhelm many others. But survival alone is slowly losing its central position within the narrative. Something else is becoming necessary: growth, adaptation, a willingness to confront worlds that cannot be mastered using the same instincts that once guaranteed survival in New York's harsh streets. The emotional tone of the film becomes richer during this process because Du Bois' journey is no longer driven solely by external danger. Internal tension begins developing alongside physical movement. The question is not only whether he can reach safety or escape immediate threats. The deeper question becoming visibly beneath the surface is whether he can evolve enough to function inside a world demanding qualities he has never fully cultivated. By the end of this phase, the hidden direction of the story becomes more tangible. The scattered pieces of international adventure, underground dealings, martial mystique, and personal displacement begin aligning toward a clearer destination. A larger contest exists somewhere ahead, an event carrying prestige, symbolism, and danger far beyond ordinary combat. Christopher Du Bois has not reached that world completely yet. He does not fully understand its rules. He does not yet understand the scale of the challenge awaiting for him. But the path leading toward it is becoming impossible to avoid, and with every passing stage of his journey, the reckless survivor from New York moves closer to a realm where instinct alone will no longer be enough, and where true strength may demand a transformation far deeper than anything he originally imagined. As the narrative of the quest continues unfolding across the increasingly mysterious international landscape, Christopher Du Bois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, moves closer toward the hidden world that had been quietly shaping the direction of his accidental journey from the beginning. By this stage of the story, the scattered elements of escape, survival, maritime danger, underground dealings, and cultural displacement begin forming a more recognizable structure. The sense of randomness that defined Du Bois' earlier experiences starts giving way to a growing feeling of purpose. Even though he himself still lacks full understanding of the larger forces surrounding him, the environments through which Du Bois travels become increasingly important because they no longer function merely as locations within an adventure narrative. Instead, they operate as stages within a gradual transformation process. Each new encounter exposes him to systems of thought, discipline, and a human behavior fundamentally different from the improvisational world that has shaped his personality back in New York. The contrast becomes sharper with every step of his journey. His natural strengths, quick thinking, resilience, adaptability, and street survival instincts remain valuable, but they increasingly appear incomplete when measured against worlds governed by a ritual, training, and structured mastery. During this phase, the film deepens the exploration of martial philosophy by introducing stronger indications that a combat within this hidden international environment is not simply about physical domination. Fighting here carries symbolic meaning connected to honor, national identity, and disciplined self-definition. This distinction matters enormously because it challenges Du Bois' original understanding of conflict. In his earlier life, violence was a practical. It existed as reaction, protection, a leverage, or survival. It belonged to chaotic circumstances where outcomes depended on speed, nerve, and opportunistic decision-making. The martial traditions emerging around him operate differently. They frame combat as an organized expression of culture, a personal refinement, and lifelong commitment. Du Bois' relationship with this unfamiliar worldview remains complicated. He does not instantly transform into a disciplined martial philosopher. His personality still carries impatience, skepticism, and the instinct to rely on improvisation whenever uncertainty increases. Yet, the narrative steadily pushes him toward experiences where observation becomes unavoidable. He begins witnessing forms of control, a skill, and focused discipline that challenge assumptions he may not even realize he holds. The atmosphere of secrecy surrounding the larger competition also becomes more pronounced during this stage. Rumors, elite participants, hidden interests, and symbolic prestige continue building anticipation around an event existing somewhere beyond ordinary public awareness. The story carefully nurtures his curiosity, music regarding this mysterious gathering, allowing its reputation to grow before revealing its full structure. Rather than treating the competition as a simple tournament, music inserted into the plot, the film builds it as an almost mythic destination, drawing together fighters, magicians, music and competing philosophies from across the different parts of the world. At the same time, the boss' internal journey grows increasingly significant in his adventures. He's still adapting to unfamiliar surroundings, still learning how to navigate music relationships and power structure as extending beyond his original experience. But subtle changes, music, begin to appear and how he responds to challenge. Moments of observation, music and strange suggest that his exposure to this new world is slowly influencing him. Music even if he resists complete transformation. This evolution remains gradual but constant. Christopher Du Bois' note, music grappling with his identity. He is still the resourceful survivor who seeks stability and life but the narrative increasingly suggests that he represents a part of the film also strengthens the movie's space using the cultural connections between the characters to create a sense of the Du Bois story. The lonely and underground and cross-cultural encounters contribute to music to the feeling that the world of the quest operates beyond narrow local and these music broader scope has enhances the sense of scale surrounding the hidden martial garden, creating a new making it feel music less like an internal and more like a symbolic meeting point for computer traditional music martial arts. As Du Bois moves closer towards this concealed world, the emotional tension inside the story begins. Music shifting from immediate survival to the readiness for adaptation. External dangers are present, music but the deeper challenge emerging beneath the surface concerns life survival. Music, truly enough inside a world shaped by a lifelong discipline. Can improvisation compete against traditions forged through rigorous training and cultural expectation? Can a man who learns strength through a chaos function within systems built around control? These questions quietly gain momentum as the story advances. By the end of this phase, the direction of the narrative feels clearer than ever before. The mysterious competition waiting no longer exists as distant rumor alone. Its presence begins influencing decisions, relationships, and expectations surrounding Du Bois' path. The reckless street hustler who once struggled merely to protect vulnerable children in New York now stands, music closer than ever to entering a hidden arena where warriors represent more than themselves. Combat carries symbolic weight, and a personal transformation may become the greatest challenge of all. He may not fully realize it yet, But the world he's approaching will demand more than courage, speed, or improvisational survival. It will demand discipline. And Christopher Du Bois' true test has only just begun. As the story of the quest moves deeper into its hidden and martial world, Christopher Du Bois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, reaches a stage in his journey where the distance between his former identity and his emerging future becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. The reckless survivor from New York, once defined almost entirely by improvisation, instinct, and desperate adaptability, now finds himself standing at the edge of a reality governed by discipline, ritual, and philosophies of combat extending far beyond anything he previously understood. What began as an accidental adventure driven by escape and circumstance is gradually transforming into something far more personal and demanding. During this phase, the mysterious atmosphere surrounding the larger martial competition begins taking clearer shape. The hidden gathering that has existed as a rumor, anticipation, and distant narrative gravity slowly becomes more tangible, revealing itself not as an ordinary contest built around entertainment or a financial reward, but as an elite convergence of fighters, traditions, and cultural identities. The importance attached to this event immediately distinguishes it from the chaotic street conflicts or opportunistic struggles that characterized Du Bois' earlier life. Here, combat carries symbolic meaning. Fighters do not enter merely as individuals seeking victory for personal pride. They increasingly appear as representatives of philosophies, training systems, and national traditions shaped through years of disciplined preparation. For Christopher Du Bois, this realization creates both fascination and discomfort. He remains an outsider to much of what he observes. The codes, customs, and values surrounding martial discipline do not align naturally with the personality forged through his years of instability and street survival. His instinctive approach to life has always relied on reading situations quickly, adjusting under pressure, and exploiting unpredictable opportunities. In contrast, the world unfolding before him values patience, mastery, ritual, and control developed through long-term commitment. This contrast becomes one of the defining tensions within his character development. Du Bois is not immediately transformed by exposure to martial philosophy. He remains skeptical, impulsive, and emotionally tied to his old methods of navigating danger. Yet, repeated encounters with a disciplined skill and structured combat begin creating quiet pressure inside his worldview. He starts recognizing that the strength operating within this hidden environment cannot be reduced to simple toughness or improvisational survival. The film strengthens this thematic direction through atmosphere, setting, and interaction. The environment surrounding Du Bois increasingly reflect cultural depth rather than transient adventure spectacle. Locations feel ancient, symbolic, and layered with traditions extending beyond the immediate concerns of individual survival. This sense of historical and philosophical weight reinforces the idea that Du Bois is no longer moving through temporary danger alone. He is entering systems shaped by inherited values and disciplined identities. At the same time, the narrative continues exploring the broader international dimension of the quest. Fighters, organizers, and interested parties from different regions contribute to a world where combat becomes a symbolic meeting point between cultures. The competition waiting ahead is not portrayed as a simple elimination tournament detached from context. It feels ceremonial, almost mythological in a reputation, existing within hidden global networks inaccessible to ordinary society. This larger scope increases the emotional significance of Du Bois' journey because participation in such a world demands more than physical capability. It demands belonging, and belonging is precisely what Christopher Du Bois has struggled with throughout much of his life. Back in New York, he survived on the edges of formal society, connected more to improvisation and unstable loyalty than to institutions or disciplined communities. Even his protective role toward a vulnerable child Rin emerged from shared hardship rather than a structured identity. Now, however, he faces environments where identity is inseparable from tradition, training, and purpose. This creates an internal challenge more complicated than physical danger. Can someone shaped by chaos adapt to a systems built around order? Can a man whose greatest skill has been a survival discover meaning in severe disciplines requiring patience, humility, and long-term dedication? The story steadily moves these questions toward the center of Du Bois' development. As anticipation surrounding the hidden competition intensifies, the emotional tone of the narrative also becomes more focused. Adventure and exotic atmosphere remain important, but beneath them grows a stronger sense of preparation. The scattered experiences of Du Bois' journey begin feeling less accidental and more interconnected, as though every hardship, encounter, and a cultural collision has been quietly steering him toward a confrontation larger than simple combat. He still carries his old personality, still improvisational, still rebellious, still shaped by instincts learned through struggle, but the world around him is demanding evolution, and for perhaps the first time in his life, Christopher Du Bois is approaching a challenge that cannot be overcome either through charm, deception, or quick escape alone. By the end of this phase, the hidden martial world of the quest stands closer than ever to fully opening before him. The tournament's presence grows stronger. The philosophies behind combat become clearer. The expectations surrounding strength begin shifting from raw survival toward a disciplined mastery. Du Bois has not completed his transformation. In many ways, it has barely begun, but the path behind him is already becoming harder to return to because the man who once fought simply to survive is moving toward a world where survival is only the starting point, and where true victory may require rediscovering an entirely new understanding of what strength actually means. As the narrative of the quest advances toward the hidden martial competition that has gradually shaped the direction of the story, Christopher Du Bois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, reaches a point in his journey where adaptation is no longer optional. The unfamiliar world surrounding him has become too rigid, too structured, and too demanding to navigate through an instinct. The reckless street survivor from New York remains present in his personality, but the environments, people, and the philosophies now influencing his path continue challenging the foundations of how he understands conflict, strength, and personal identity. The mysterious martial gathering that once existed, as Remar and distant mythology begins emerging with greater clarity during this phase of the story. The film increasingly reveals that this competition is not designed to promote perspective or individual liberation. Instead, it exists as a hidden ceremonial. Where selected fighters from different nations and martial artists, come together under rules. Shaped by discipline. Symbolic as ceremony carries a sense of exclusivity in ancient Japan, as though participation itself signifies entry into a world of excess and thea. Exposure to this environment brings complications to university and discipline. The continued separation from the perspective of society and the yakuza. Years of indoctrination and destruction. This class teaches system and ideology and self-control. Yet, the discipline displayed by fighters and martial practitioners within this hidden world presents evidence of a different relationship with the law, one based not on opportunism or dominance. On control defined through sustained training and philosophical commitment. This realization begins by exerting a subtle pressure on the body and mind. He is not suddenly transformed into a perfectly disciplined martial figure. His impatience, rebellious instincts, and improvisational nature remains central to his character. However, the future exposure to structure combat slowly challenges the assumptions he brings to the dojo. Music A. He begins observing and analyzing Thea fighters, repetition A, music A, and emotional control A on a level largely absent from his previous life. The film deepens Thea's contrast through its portrayal of Thea fighters preparing for competition. These individuals are not merely athletes seeking personal recognition. They increasingly appear as symbolic representatives of cultural systems carrying expectations connected to a national identity, training heritage, and philosophical traditions. Combat within this environment feels ritualized rather than random, governed by rules that transform a fighting into something larger than a physical confrontation. Christopher Du Bois remains an outsider within much of this structure, and that outsider status continues shaping his emotional experience. He possesses courage and adaptability, but belonging inside this world requires qualities he has not fully developed. The narrative uses this tension effectively because it prevents his journey from becoming a simple story of instant mastery. Instead, his evolution remains grounded in discomfort, observation, and gradual confrontation with the limitations of his own methods. At the same time, the broader international atmosphere of the quest becomes richer and more layered. In political interests, cultural intersections, colonial era influences, and underground networks continue reinforcing the idea that the competition exists within a world shaped by competing traditions and shifting global realities. The event awaiting Du Bois feels increasingly significant not merely because of combat itself, but because of what combat represents inside the environment. Discipline, prestige, identity, and a symbolic conflict between diverse philosophies of strength. Also, anticipation surrounding the tournament intensifies. The emotional stakes of Du Bois' journey deepen alongside the physical ones. Earlier stages of the story focus heavily on escape, survival, and accidental displacement. Now, however, the narrative begins emphasizing a preparation, transformation, and a readiness for a challenge capable of testing not only fighting ability, but personal character. This shift becomes increasingly important because Du Bois is approaching a confrontation with more than opponents. He is approaching a confrontation with himself, with the version of himself shaped by instability, improvisation, and reactive survival, with the question of whether herds without discipline can compete inside systems built around a mastery, with the uncomfortable possibility that his greatest obstacle may not be the fighters waiting. Music ahead, but the limits of the identity he has carried throughout his life. The story quietly builds this internal tension while continuing its broader adventure momentum. Exotic locations, hidden traditions, and escalating anticipations, music surrounding the martial gathering create a sense that multiple narrative threads are gradually converging toward a decisive turning point. By the end of this phase, the hidden world of the quest no longer feels distant or abstract. The competition's presence becomes immediate. The expectations surrounding the combat grow clearer. The philosophies underlying martial discipline stand directly before Christopher Du Bois, rather than somewhere beyond the horizon. He still carries the instincts of a survivor, still relies on improvisation, still resists easy submission to a structured system. But, the world awaiting him demands something more refined than survival alone. And as the path toward the competition narrows, Du Bois moves closer to discovering whether a man forged through chaos can learn to stand inside a realm defined by discipline, honor, and a controlled mastery without losing the core of who he truly is. As the story of the quest moves deeper into its hidden martial mythology, Christopher Du Bois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, reaches a stage in his journey where the mysterious competition that has influenced the narrative from a distance begins taking on concrete reality. The atmosphere surrounding the event grows increasingly powerful, no longer functioning as rumor, fragmented information, or symbolic destination alone. Instead, it begins revealing itself as an elite gathering existing within a concealed world where combat is inseparable from discipline, prestige, and deeply rooted cultural identity. For Du Bois, whose life has been shaped by improvisation, survival, and unstable circumstances, entering closer proximity to Thea's environment creates emotional tension that extends far beyond the physical challenge of fighting. The hidden competition emerges. Music is something far more ceremonial and philosophically layered than an ordinary tournament. Fighters from different nations and traditions are not portrayed as interchangeable opponents gathered simply for spectacle or entertainment. Each participant increasingly represents a broader system of training, values, music, and historical martial identity. The event carries an atmosphere, music of exclusivity and ritualized seriousness, creating the impression that combat inside this world functions as symbolic expression as much as a physical confrontation. Strength here is measured not only by a power or aggression, but by discipline, control, and mastery. Music, cultivated over long periods of dedicated practice, for Christopher Du Bois, exposure to Thea's environment intensifies the contrast between who he has been and what Thea's world expects from those who wish to compete within it. His personality remains rooted in the resilience, adaptability, and Thea instincts developed through hardship and street survival. He understands danger, he understands the pressure, he understands how to react when circumstances become unstable or hostile. Yet, the martial environment unfolding around him demands music, something different from simple survival expertise. It values preparation over improvisation, a structure over spontaneity, and a disciplined refinement over reactive courage. This ideological difference becomes one of the central emotional tensions shaping his development during this phase of the film. Du Bois does not suddenly abandon his old identity or transform into an entirely different person. His skepticism, impulsiveness, and independent instincts remain intact. However, the deeper he moves into Thea's hidden martial world, the harder it becomes for him to ignore the legitimacy of what he is witnessing. The discipline surrounding elite fighters is not superficial performance or empty ritual. It produces real capability, emotional control, and a level of focused mastery difficult to dismiss even from the perspective of someone who built his life around adaptability rather than a formal structure. The story uses Thea's progression to deepen its exploration of that transformation. Earlier stages of Du Bois' journey emphasize movement through unfamiliar locations, accidental displacement, and a survival interchanging music circumstances. Now, the challenge becomes increasingly internal. The question is no longer simply whether he can endure dangerous environments or navigate unpredictable situations. The more significant question concerns whether he can evolve enough to operate meaningfully inside a world whose core assumptions differ profoundly from his own. The atmosphere of the competition itself strengthens this thematic direction. The fighters surrounding Du Bois carry distinct styles, national identities, and combat philosophies, reinforcing the idea that martial skill within the quest is deeply connected to cultural representation. Combat becomes a language through which our values, traditions, and disciplined worldviews are expressed. This broader symbolic framework elevates the stakes of participation, transforming the tournament into something larger than a personal ambition or individual rivalry. At the same time, the film continues preserving its adventurous international tone through layered settings, cross-cultural interactions, and hidden political undertones. The world surrounding the tournament feels removed from ordinary modern visibility, almost mythic in its secrecy and exclusivity. This atmosphere contributes significantly to the sense that Du Bois is entering territory governed by older rules and expectations than anything music he encountered during his former life in New York. As anticipation builds, Du Bois's internal conflict becomes increasingly noticeable beneath his outward resilience. He remains courageous and resourceful, But exposure to disciplined martial environments forces him to confront uncomfortable truths about the limitations of pure improvisation, surviving difficult circumstances and mastering oneself. Music are not necessarily identical achievements. These realization carries quiet but growing music emotional weight, because Christopher Du Bois has spent much of his life mastering music instability. But the world opening before him is built around mastering control. Music the difference between those two forms of strength becomes impossible to ignore. Again, at this stage, the hidden competition stands fully revealed. Music the ceremonial atmosphere surrounding the combat grows stronger. The expectations of discipline and the structure, music, of the mystery become unmistakably clear. Du Bois finds himself closer than ever to participating in the world where fighters carry symbolic responsibility alongside music physical skill, where victory demands far more than knowledge. Music he still carries the instinct of survival, still questions music. He still relies on adaptability when the pressure intensifies, but the challenge music awaiting him operates according to different principles, as the gates of this crucial game are laid out before him. Christopher Du Bois learns that his traditional ways of fighting the Braziliana can be reshaped into something better, forged in fire. And the narrative of Christopher Du Bois is the same as his hidden need. Christopher Du Bois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, finds himself in the world of privatized combat, where discipline and symbolic representation between the international fighters at each stage of the story brings a new understanding and a new reality and approaching destination, a whispered legend. Music, existing somewhere beyond the horizon. It has become an immediate reality unfolding. Music, within an atmosphere charged with prestige, secrecy, and the intense psychological pressures that naturally accompanies environments where skill, honor, and reputation intersect. Every participant bears visible evidence of discipline and preparation extending far beyond the norm. Music the tournament environment itself reinforces the distinction between the ceremonial structure and music, the serious emotional weight attached to participation. Combat here is more than a mere entertainment. It is a simple necessity. Music represents years of sacrifice, a national symbolism, personal philosophy, and the disciplined pursuit of mastery. For Christopher Du Bois, entering more directly into this environment intensifies the ongoing conflict between his established identity and the expectations of the world surrounding him. He continues carrying the instincts developed through hardship, unpredictability, and street-level survival. His resilience remains undeniable, his courage remains genuine, his ability to adapt under pressure continues functioning as one of his greatest strengths. Yet, the martial environment confronting him increasingly demands forms of control and discipline that challenge the improvisational logic upon which he has depended for much of his life. The of this challenge becomes clearer as the war observes the fighters surrounding him. These individuals are not merely dangerous opponents, distinguished by a physical ability alone. They embody disciplined systems of training, deeply connected to cultural history, martial philosophy, and personal sacrifice. Their movements, attitudes, and preparation reflect worlds in which mastery is cultivated patiently through a structure rather than discovered through desperate survival. This contrast continues shaping the war's internal development in meaningful ways. He remains skeptical of rigid systems in many respects, still influenced by a lifetime spent surviving unstable circumstances where flexibility often mattered more than goals. However, exposure to the hidden competition steadily erodes on the lingering assumption that improvisational resilience alone defines a complete strength. The discipline surrounding him is too tangible, too effective, and too deeply integrated into the identities of those participating to dismiss as mere ceremonial tradition. The film deepens this thematic tension by emphasizing the symbolic nature of the tournament itself. Participants increasingly appear not as isolated competitors chasing individual recognition, but as extensions of larger traditions carrying cultural pride, martial legacy, and philosophical values intercombat. This framing expands the emotional and ideological scale of the competition, transforming each confrontation into a music, something that reflects broader systems of meaning beyond personal rivalry alone. At the same time, the quest continues reinforcing its international atmosphere through layered environmental detail, hidden political undertones, and the diverse backgrounds of those gathered for the event. The competition feels almost removed from ordinary historical reality, existing within a secretive realm where elite fighters, influential observers, and complex music motivations intersect beneath strict structures and ancient expectations. This world remains fascinating, but also emotionally demanding for someone like Du Bois, whose previous existence was defined more by immediate necessity than a ceremonial purpose. As the tournament environment grows more intense, the emotional pressure inside Du Bois' journey becomes increasingly internalized. Earlier phases of his story emphasize external danger, displacement, and accidental adventure. Now, however, the deeper struggle concerns capability, identity, and readiness. He's no longer merely trying to survive via hostile conditions or navigate unfamiliar territories. He's trying to determine whether he belongs inside a world built around forms of strength fundamentally different from those that shaped him. Can instinct coexist with discipline? Can adaptability stand beside lifelong mastery? Can someone forged through hardship and improvisation compete meaningfully against opponents refined through structured traditions extending across generations? These questions continue gathering emotional force beneath the surface of the narrative. The atmosphere surrounding the competition reinforces the sense of approaching judgment. Every ritual element, every disciplined participant, and every indication of martial prestige contributes to the feeling that Christopher Du Bois stands before a challenge far music, more significant than any confrontation from his past. The streets of New York, the desperate hustles, the improvised escapes, and the unstable survival strategies that once defined his world now feel distant compared to the ceremonial gravity of the environment surrounding him. Yet, despite his uncertainty, something within Du Bois continues evolving, no to perfection, not complete transformation, but growing awareness, an emerging understanding that survival may be only one dimension of strength, and that true mastery might require confronting aspects of himself he has spent years avoiding. By the end of this phase, the hidden martial world of the quest feels fully alive around him. The competition's symbolic importance stands unmistakably clear. The disciplined expectations of combat culture grow impossible to ignore. The distance between Christopher Du Bois and his defining test continues shrinking rapidly. He still carries the unpredictability of a survivor, still resists easy conformity, still approaches conflict with instincts shaped by struggle rather than ceremony. But the arena waiting him measures the fighters through standards far deeper than simple courage or resilience, and as the tournament moves closer toward decisive confrontation, Du Bois approaches the moment where adaptation, identity, and martial capability will finally collide under pressures unlike anything he has ever faced before. Also, the story of the quest enters its most critical phase. The hidden martial tournament becomes the complete center of Christopher Du Bois' reality, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, where every remaining moment is shaped by anticipation, preparation, and the psychological weight of stepping into a world that operates under entirely different rules than anything he has previously experienced. By this stage, the competition is no longer a distant mystery or symbolic destination. It is fully present, structured, and active around him, demanding participation under conditions that test not only physical capability, but also emotional control, discipline, and identity itself. The environment of the tournament reveals its true nature more clearly as Du Bois moves deeper into its structure. Fighters from different nations are now fully visible as representatives, music of distinct martial traditions, each carrying their own approach to a combat shaped by history, philosophy, and training discipline. The arena does not function as a chaotic battleground, but as an organized system where combat unfolds under controlled rules designed to measure skill, mastery, and adaptability. Every match becomes a reflection of something larger than individual victory, transforming each confrontation into a symbolic expression of cultural and martial identity. For Christopher Du Bois, this reality creates the most intense internal pressure he has faced throughout his entire journey. His life has been shaped by unpredictability, improvisation, and a survival through rapid adaptation. He understands conflict in terms of immediacy, opportunity, and instinctive reaction under pressure. However, the world he is, music, now entering evaluates strength differently. It values repetition over improvisation, a control over spontaneity, and a disciplined refinement over reactive survival. This difference forces him into a psychological space where his established strengths must either evolve or risk becoming insufficient. The emotional weight of this moment is intensified by the contrast between what Du Bois was at the beginning of his journey and who he is becoming through exposure to this hidden martial world. He is no longer merely a street survivor navigating unstable circumstances for a temporary advantage. He is now standing at the threshold of a structured system where identity is shaped through training, commitment, and adherence to a martial philosophy. This shift does not erase his past, but places it in tension with the expectations of the present environment. As preparation for the tournament's decisive stages continues, Du Bois observes more closely the fighters around him, recognizing that their abilities are not simply the result of natural strength or aggression, but of disciplined systems developed over long periods of focused practice. Their movements reflect control, precision, and an internalized understanding of combat principles, music, that extend beyond instinct. This exposure forces Du Bois to reconsider assumptions he has carried for most of his life regarding what it means to be strong, capable, music, or prepared for confrontation. The tournament itself grows increasingly symbolic as it approaches the final stages. Music is not merely a contest of elimination, but a structured representation of competing martial philosophies. Music where each fight contributes to a broader narrative of discipline versus improvisation, tradition, music, versus adaptation, and control versus instinct. The environment, music, reinforces these meaning through ritualized structure and the serious emotional presence of music participants, making it clear that every action within the arena carries weight, meaning, and consequence. Music internally, the boss continues to experience the tension between his instinctive identity and the expectations of the music world he is under. He remains skeptical of the existing systems and structures of society, shaped by a lifetime of suffering with the possibility of genuine transformation. Yet, the consistency and effectiveness of the martial discipline surrounding him gradually challenges the boundaries of his self-perception. He begins to recognize that survival can no longer, music, be the ultimate goal, and that true mastery requires a level of personal transformation. At the same time, the emotional journey of the boss begins to intensify. Earlier phases music were characterized by fear and uncertainty and doubt. Now, however, he is moving toward music, a defined confrontation that cannot be avoided or redirected. The tournament represents a point of convergence, music where all previous experiences, struggles, and adaptations must be tested against a structured system designed, music, to measure capability and experience. By the end of this stage, the hidden martial world of the quest stands fully revealed to him. No Music, longer distant and theoretical, but immediate and unavoidable. The arena is no longer waiting, music in the wings. It is actively shaping his reality, forcing him into a position. Music with participation. Music yet the world. Music. Before him now demands something more refined, controlled, and disciplined. And as he steps closer to the decisive moments of the tournament, the final question emerges with increasing clarity. Not whether he can survive what lies ahead, but whether he can evolve and not to stand as an equal within a world that defines strength through entirely different rules than the ones he has ever known. As the story of the quest moves into its final stretch, the atmosphere inside the hidden martial tournament becomes fully charged with inevitability, where every remaining moment carries the weight of preparation turning into action, and uncertainty transforming it into confrontation. Christopher Du Bois, played by Jean-Claude Van Damme, has now entered a world that is no longer distant or unfamiliar. It is immediate, immersive, and impossible to ignore. Here, discipline, martial philosophy, and personal identity merge into a single, demanding reality that challenges everyone who steps into it. At this point, the tournament is no longer just the setting of the story or its ultimate destination. It has become a living system with its own rhythm, structure, and deeper symbolic meaning. Competitors from different nations and martial arts traditions are fully immersed in the competition, and every confrontation represents far more than physical strength. Each match serves as a disciplined display of years of training, cultural heritage, and unique combat philosophies. Victory is no longer just a personal accomplishment. It symbolizes the strength, honor, and legacy of an entire martial tradition. For Christopher Du Bois, this environment creates his greatest challenge yet, forcing him to confront the person he has always been and the individual this world expects him to become. His natural instincts are still rooted in survival, quick thinking, and adaptability, qualities forged through years of hardship and uncertainty. Those instincts have carried him through countless dangerous situations, allowing him to overcome immediate threats and survive when the odds were against him. However, once Du Bois enters the structured environment of the tournament, he quickly realizes that instinct alone is no longer enough. The fighters around him display a level of discipline, precision, and control that can only come from years of dedicated training and relentless practice. At this stage, his journey becomes far more personal. The greatest challenge is no longer the unfamiliar world around him, it is a struggle within himself. Instead of simply adapting to new surroundings, Du Bois is forced to confront the limits of his own skills and experience. The contrast between raw instinct and disciplined mastery becomes increasingly clear. This isn't about rejecting the street-smart abilities that helped him survive. It's about discovering whether those experiences can evolve into something capable of succeeding within a system built on tradition, structure, and discipline. This inner conflict influences the way he sees every opponent, every movement, and every display of controlled martial arts technique. As the tournament progresses, its deeper meaning becomes even more apparent. The competition is never portrayed as chaotic violence. Instead, each fight is a carefully structured contest governed by rules that elevate every encounter into an expression of martial philosophy and respect. The competitors are not simply individuals chasing victory, they represent disciplined traditions that have shaped their understanding of strength, honor, and combat. This added depth transforms the arena into more than just a battleground. It becomes a meeting place where different martial arts philosophies come together, challenge one another, and reveal their true character through controlled competition. As Du Bois watches these encounters more closely, he begins to understand that real strength is measured by far more than quick reactions or the ability to endure hardship. It is built through consistency, self-control, and mastery earned over years of disciplined training. This realization doesn't instantly change who he is, but it marks the beginning of a profound transformation. For the first time, Du Bois starts to understand what it truly takes to compete at the highest level. The contrast between survival-driven ability and true martial mastery becomes impossible to ignore. forcing Christopher Dubois to question the beliefs he developed in a life where quick instincts and adaptability often mattered more than disciplined training. At the same time, the emotional side of Dubois' journey comes into sharper focus. His place in the tournament is no longer the result of chance or circumstance. Instead, it represents the culmination of a long journey through unfamiliar lands, escalating challenges, and gradual immersion into a hidden world that now demands his complete commitment. With every stage of the tournament, the possibility of turning back or remaining an outsider fades away. The competition draws him deeper into its defining moments, while the fighters around him prepare with unwavering dedication. The atmosphere shifts from anticipation to action, as every participant understands that what lies ahead will shape not only the final results, but also their reputations, legacies, and the honor of the martial traditions they represent. In this environment, hesitation comes at a cost, and clarity of purpose becomes just as essential as physical strength and technical skill. For Christopher Dubois, the greatest challenge is bringing two very different worlds together. He must reconcile the instincts forged through hardship and survival with the discipline, control, and precision demanded by the world of organized martial arts. His journey has not erased his past, but it has forced him to confront a new reality that cannot be mastered through instinct alone. As this chapter reaches its conclusion, the tournament stands on the edge of its decisive final stage. The arena is alive with energy, the fighters are fully prepared, and the hidden world of martial arts has revealed itself in its complete form. At the center of it all stands Christopher Dubois, caught between identity and transformation, instinct and discipline, survival and mastery, ready to face the defining moment of his journey. As the final stage approaches, the question is no longer whether Christopher Dubois can adapt. Instead, it becomes whether the man shaped by years of struggle can evolve into someone capable of thriving in a world where strength is defined by principles completely different from anything he has ever known. As the quest reaches its powerful conclusion, the secret martial arts tournament enters its decisive final chapter. Every step of Christopher Dubois' journey, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, comes together in a defining moment where combat, discipline, and personal transformation merge into a single reality. Inside the arena, the atmosphere has shifted. Preparation and anticipation have given way to resolution as the true significance of the tournament is revealed through its final confrontations. Fighters from different martial traditions and philosophies face one another, each representing a unique understanding of strength, honor, and mastery. By this point, the tournament is far more than a series of matches. It has become the ultimate expression of the hidden martial world and the values it represents. Years of disciplined training, cultural heritage, and unwavering dedication are reflected in every competitor. Here, true strength is measured not only by physical power but also by self-control, focus, resilience, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. Every remaining fight represents the culmination of a lifetime of preparation. Each exchange carries meaning that extends beyond the arena, reinforcing the idea that combat in this world is both a physical challenge and a symbolic test of character. Christopher Dubois enters this final phase no longer as an accidental participant or survivor displaced from the streets of New York. He has been fundamentally transformed by everything he has experienced. The instincts, resourcefulness, and resilience that once defined him remain, but they are now strengthened by a deeper understanding of discipline, structure, and controlled power. The hardships he has endured throughout his journey have not erased his past. Instead, they have forced him to reconcile it with a world built on entirely different ideals of combat and personal growth. Ultimately, the emotional heart of this final chapter is not victory alone, but the remarkable transformation of a man who discovers that true strength comes from mastering both himself and the challenges before him. Dubois' place in the tournament marks the meeting point of two very different worlds. One is shaped by instability, instinct, and the constant struggle to survive, while the other is built on discipline, mastery, and a deep philosophical approach to combat. His journey explores whether the adaptability forged through years of hardship can evolve into true discipline when tested within a system rooted in tradition, precision, and self-control. As the tournament reaches its final stages, the central question is no longer whether Du Bois can survive physically. Instead, it becomes whether he can fully embrace the values and expectations of the world he has entered. The fighters surrounding him represent complete martial identities. Each one has devoted years to mastering a unique fighting system, shaped by cultural traditions and philosophies that define their understanding of strength and honor. Du Bois, however, stands between two identities. He still carries the unpredictability and resilience born from a life of survival, yet he is gradually embracing the discipline and control that martial arts demand. His transformation becomes just as important as the battles themselves. The tournament's conclusion is about far more than exciting fights. It brings together two opposing ideals, proving that true combat is not only a test of physical ability but also a reflection of character, belief, and personal growth. Every strike, movement, and decision represents more than technical skill. Each fighter expresses the experiences, values, and principles that have shaped their journey. For Christophe Du Bois, the end of the competition is more than a victory or defeat. It marks the defining moment of his personal transformation, revealing how far he has come and the person he has ultimately become. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this review, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth movie reviews, breakdowns, and fascinating film facts. See you in the next video.